we can talk about this. Where the fuck am I? Battlemonk. Warrior's middle path focuses on combos and knockback. What does that even mean? It is also the second least played archetype in raids. Despite receiving a mini rework, Battlemonk remains one of the least popular archetypes at endgame. So, to find out why, I decided to play Battlemonk for 10 hours to see if it's any good. Alright, how do you play Battlemonk? Sure, it can't be too hard. Let's see, what do we have here? Why are all the nodes just spell upgrades? What am I supposed to do with this tree? With every other archetype I've played in the past, it was pretty clear to me what the tree was trying to accomplish and what spells I was supposed to be using. Summoner's unique summons are all tied to red nodes, and many of the other nodes either directly add to your summons or present a new way to interact with them. Sharpshooter does more damage if you don't miss, and if you're on spell sharp, you just cycle between your 2 damage spells. But Battlemonk has 4 damage spells. And as you go down the tree, these spells get various upgrades in the form of damage or new properties attached to them. The tree also incentivizes you to use multiple of these spells through 2 of its red nodes, the first of which being Generalist. After casting 3 different spells, the next spell costs 1 mana. And Battlemonk's third and newest red node, Pressure, enhances the spell that Generalist procs on. Well, except for Charge. From these nodes, I had a vague idea what to do. Pressure War Scream whenever I don't have its damage buff, and then after that, proc Pressure in either Bash or Up Air. Which one, you ask? No idea! Normally, I prefer trying to figure things out on my own first, but some of the abilities just didn't seem very good. And so I had a bunch of extra AP that I wasn't sure how to use because I wasn't familiar with Warrior's ability tree. So I decided to ask for some help. Hey, is this Bmonk 101? How do I drop out of this class? I decided to ask the resident Battlemonk specialist, Divine Insect, for some help, and he gave it a tree and cycle for basic Battlemonk Scream Surf. I took some time to read everything over and process the spell cycle. The numbers each correspond to the different spells. 1 is first spell, which is Bash, 2 is second spell, Charge, 3 is third spell, Uppercut, and 4 is fourth spell, War Scream. 3, 4, 2, aka Uppercut, War Scream, Charge is 3 different spells, so the next spell will proc Generalist. Procking on War Scream to get a strength buff from Pressure. Important thing to note, the spell that you proc Generalist on counts towards the 3 different spells. So after War Scream, if you cast Uppercut and Charge, that's 3 spells. Your next spell will then proc Generalist, so repeat 3-4-2 and you will always get Pressure Uppercut. 3-4-2 is the normal cycle that gets Pressure Uppercut, and the other cycle gets Pressure Strength and puts you back onto 3-4-2. Also, you do this while flying. Bmonk's second red, Whirlwind Strike, sends you up in the air when you cast Uppercut. Combine this with Aerodynamics, which lets you steer and change directions during charge, and you can surf. I spent the first hour or 2 just practicing the spell cycle since I tried to play surf before the rework and it didn't go very well.
Kinda trumps that, so...
Yeah, exactly.
Wait, I fucked it up.
Oh.
Okay, you know what? I'm just gonna go in. I'm just gonna press buttons and pray to God.
Okay.
Okay, time to queue a raid. Yeah, this is pretty fun. There's an obvious comparison you can make between Acrobat and Battlemonk. Both are flying spell spam playstyles that require a bit more effort to fully utilize. So I went in thinking that it'd be kinda similar, but there are some differences and one of these took a bit to get used to. That being the height at which the two play at. On Acrobat you can play pretty high up and still hit all your spells, but on Battlemonk, Whirlwind Strike only has a few blocks of downward range. With Acrobat you can kinda just hover over enemies, but when I tried to do that on Battlemonk I was too high up for my uppercuts to hit. and Uppercut is where a large portion of the damage comes from, since it's boosted by both Pressure and Sacred Surge from Paladinry. To get around this, I started incorporating shifting since casting shift during charge drops you down, allowing me to hit my uppercuts. This means I'd have to stop trying to hover because I'd probably explode if I stayed still in shift drop.
I'm actually about to hit a clip on Orphe on here.
Alright, I'm watching your stream right now. Instead, I used the momentum from Whirlwind plus aerodynamics to strafe around bosses, constantly moving around as I dive to the end uppers. Battlemonk movement is so smooth and I can't emphasize this enough. Aerodynamics is a bit slower than normal charge, but you are always moving so the playstyle still feels extremely fast. The survivability is also really good. The build I'm playing only has about 10k raw HP and I have negative defense and agility, but by being a flying playstyle it inherently dodges most attacks. In the attacks designed for anti-air, I could kinda just outsurf. And Warrior is also really tanky. It's tied for Assassin for the highest base resistance at 100%, but if you go Battlemonk, you grab Tougher Skin, which increases your base resistance to 105%. You have War Scream, which gives you 20% resistance, 25% with a Bolden Cry, and you also have easy access to mantles, which actually just make you almost unkillable while active. This means my ETW build actually has 47k EHP. Battlemonk also has Counter, which reduces damage by 20%, but it's kinda redundant given everything else, and I'd rather spend the AP elsewhere. All of these things I'm saying sound pretty great, so what's the problem? Why don't more people play Battlemonk? Damage. On dummy, I was averaging between 300 and 350k DPS, which in my opinion is more than enough, but it's important to consider the context behind these numbers. I have a full damage build with crafted and high damage rolls, I have tomes and basically max aspects, I'm playing with a hybrid tree and spell cycle made by a guy who has Battlemonk spreadsheets. Point I'm making is, the average player does not have access to or know about these things. The average Battlemonk's numbers are probably pretty bad, especially when you compare to other archetypes that both do more damage and don't require as much effort. Why bother with Generalist when you can just spam 2 spells on something else and do more damage? These things all contribute to Battlemonk's pretty poor reputation, and as a result, people don't want to play Battlemonk. Because of this, there is a gap in information. Battlemonk is probably more capable than a lot of people think, though that's probably because expectations are so low. But since people don't play Battlemonk, not many people know how to build or play it. Combine this with a not very intuitive playstyle, and there's a pretty big barrier of entry for an archetype with middling payoff. Speaking of the knowledge gap, I actually experienced it again a few hours in. Sorcery is a major idea that makes it so whenever you cast a spell or attack, there's a 25% chance it gets recast for free. I've heard sorcery is really bad for Battlemonk since it can interfere with Generalist, but at some point I decided to grab a sorcery buff just to experience it myself. And this is where I noticed something kinda odd. My cycle was unaffected. Generalist always activated on the spell I wanted it to proc on, even with the recast. After the raid, I asked Divine Intellect and they told me that if the spell casted before Generalist is charged, nothing gets messed up. And the cycle they gave me always has charge right before the pressure spell. Oh, okay. I wanted to figure out why this works, so I did some thinking and I came up with 2 reasons. The first has to do with how Generalist actually works. The description says you have to cast 3 different spells in a row, but this isn't true. It doesn't actually have to be consecutive. For example, if I cast Uppercut, charge, charge, charge! War Scream. My next spell will trigger Generalist even though I casted the same spell multiple times. All that matters is that I casted 3 different spells. So this means it doesn't matter if my War Scream or my Uppercut get recasted since I still need to cast Charge as my 3rd unique spell. The second reason is that Sorcery doesn't recast movement spells such as Charge. This means it's impossible for a Charge to get recasted and spill into your next cycle. And by casting Charge as the final spell before Generalist, you also ensure that if the spell before Charge gets recasted, it also doesn't spill into your next cycle. Right now you might be wondering how come this spell doesn't consume the Generalist in pressure activation. And that's because of the third reason, which Divine Insect told me afterward. Sorcery recasts don't consume Generalist. So if you do 3 unique spells and then a spell gets recasted, the next spell will still be affected by Generalist and pressure. If you're still confused, let me break down this clip where I'm doing Uppercut Charge War Scream, which is an unsafe cycle with Sorcery. As you can see right here, my Uppercut gets recasted right after my 3rd unique spell. But since recasts don't consume Generalist, my next Uppercut is still 1 mana. The 1 mana Uppercut counts as the 1st unique spell in my next cycle. But now here you see my War Scream from before gets recasted, making it my 2nd unique spell this cycle. My next spell in the cycle is Charge, becoming the 3rd unique spell. This is a problem. This means my next War Scream, which was supposed to be the 3rd unique spell, ends up being the one that consumes Generalist instead of the Uppercut. If I had done Uppercut War Scream Charge instead, it would have been fine, since charge can't get recasted, so it wouldn't have spilled into the next cycle like War Scream did. Right after this discovery, I switched my chest plate for Time Rift and there was a pretty noticeable damage increase. And I think it's probably safe to assume a lot of people don't know about this interaction, including probably some Battlemonk players. Now I want to talk a bit about the tree and overall design since I have a bit more experience now. I think crosspathing is one of the most interesting parts of having an ability tree, but Battlemonk in its current state is pretty reliant on it. So many of the nodes don't feel worth it. Counter and Riposte suffer from opportunity cost since mantles are so easily accessible, and the damage may as well be cosmetic. You're already encouraged to spec a bit into Paladin to grab Iron Youngs, which increases the damage of Air Shout, so you may as well grab mantles as well, which are directly after Iron Youngs. The extra AP isn't worth using to spec into more Battlemonk nodes than necessary since Battlemonk is just kinda better in every way. Tempest and Cyclone are both AoE circle abilities that spawn after you cast War Scream, and at first I didn't even know which one of these was Tempest and which was Cyclone. Tempest is the blue one that disappears quickly, and Cyclone is the red outer circle that for some reason has a 20-second duration. Just a bit overkill, I think. Having both of these exist feels kinda redundant given they basically do the same thing. Okay, now I should probably address that node. An ability that is almost unanimously hated and is also mandatory. Flying Kick. Flying Kick increases the damage on charge and also makes it so when you hit a mob with it, it completely halts your momentum. I didn't actually mind Flying Kick though, that might have to do with using Idle, which has a major idea that makes Flying Kick send you forward, which is probably a bit more tolerable. So, to experience the pain and agony of generations of Battlemonk players, I decided to queue some raids with a different weapon and purposely bash my face into everything to get the authentic Flying Kick experience. Okay, it's a tiny bit bad. You can still play around it, and even when I accidentally hit it, I didn't really mind that much. But maybe that's because I've achieved inner peace. Help! Please! Help me! Please! I don't think it's worth actively trying to use though, since the damage is very underwhelming and doesn't really justify charging into mobs and halting your momentum for. I'd rather just strafe around mobs and move around uninterrupted. You can increase the damage with Collide, but that node isn't very good either. Hitting an enemy into a wall with Flying Kick will do an explosion that does additional damage on top of the Flying Kick. I guess that's where the knockback part comes from. Good luck with that, I guess. And the second effect increases the damage of Flying Kick itself. But the damage increase is pretty weak, especially when you consider half of it is converted to fire, and the first effect is incredibly niche. The node also costs 2 AP, so it's just never worth taking. Oh, a ping from the Greenpath Discord. I wonder what that could be. Oh my god, bruh. Okay, yes and earned. Don't take 4 months to make these videos. TLDR. Spirit of the Rabbit was moved to the main path, which is good for non-idle builds since it provides charge cost reduction. Airshot power was taken away from Iron Youngs and moved to base Airshout and Reverberate, reducing crosspath reliance. Flying Kick damage buff, and various other changes. But the main thing is the buff to Pressure Bash. You might have noticed that I haven't said anything about Pressure Bash and none of the cycles I used include it. Since Bash has a duration, the idea is you Pressure Scream for strength, then Pressure Bash, and while the Bash is ongoing, you Pressure Uppercut. The problem though is it wasn't really worth using these cycles. Sorcery interferes with Generalist if you try to use all 3 combat skills, and you also need to grab Thunderclap. Thunderclap is probably one of the highest value nodes in the game when you consider everything it does. On Double Bash it adds 240% damage, it adds 3 blocks of AoE, it doubles bash speed and centers it at the player. The node is insane, don't get me wrong, but if you want to use Pressure Bash you have to grab it. Scream Surf can just ignore it, spend the 2 AP on something else, and also use Sorcery with no issues, which would just offset the damage increase you would get from incorporating Pressure Bash. So how did they address this? They just gave it more hits. Hey Divine Insect, do you have a cycle that uses all 3 pressure effects? Overall, a pretty good patch for Battlemonk. The damage increase by including Pressure Bash is pretty noticeable now, and they're making an effort to reduce crosspath reliance and address some of the more underwhelming nodes. Going in, I honestly had very little expectations given Battlemonk's pretty awful reputation, but I went away with a pretty good experience. Out of all the archetypes I've covered so far, Battlemonk was the one I had the most fun on. And while it's not competitive, I also wouldn't call it bad at all. It is capable of doing more than enough damage for me to not want to play all my brains out if I have to solo a raid boss. The survivability is pretty insane, and there's a support aspect as well since the pressure strength buff can be given to other players. This strength bonus alongside Emboldening Cry also stack with other strength effects. With all things considered, I'd honestly say Battlemonk is pretty solid. Parts of its tree are still a bit questionable. A note I haven't mentioned yet, Discombobulate can give you up to 900 raw spell if you're able to do neutral damage as well as all types of elemental damage. And you can grab it as early as level 60. For reference, the strongest spears at that level can hover around 350 base after powders, which means 900 raw spell would be equivalent to 257% spell damage. 2 AP by the way. While this raw spell isn't as effective at endgame, it's still a pretty noticeable amount of damage that some weapons can't benefit from as much due to a lack of powder slots. Discombobulate is also just boring, I don't know. I think space could be made if stuff like Tempest and Cyclone are condensed, while abysmal dogshit such as Kayai just get replaced, allowing for power redistribution. But yeah, that's all I have to say. Try out Battlemonk, it's pretty fun. Just maybe install Windcraft Spellcaster unless you want Carpal Tunnel. See you in 3 months.